internal family systems sounds like something you would apply to a family. This therapy was designed by a guy named Richard Schwartz, Dr. Richard Schwartz, in 1985. He began to realize that he was noticing that most people had parts of them that would get activated during different times in different situations. And these parts can kind of be seen as like defense mechanisms that you pick up along the way.
Welcome to the One Moment Podcast with your boy co-host Kevin Odom, and we got Mr. Trev. Everybody knows who he is, an ex-corrections officer. Man, I can't even talk this morning. So, working on my second cup of coffee this morning, and we have an amazing lady here to talk to us today. And we continue to break down barriers and stigmas one day at a time, one moment at a time. That's the important piece, right? So, everybody knows me. Everybody knows Trev. And so I met this young lady probably a month ago, roughly give or take. And she is doing similar things to what we're trying to do. Break down barriers, break stigmas on social media, and really get hope out there to people. So without further ado, Miss Lady McTherapist, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm in a season of life where things are just incredibly busy. I have a lot of different irons in this fire, but I've just been trying to use time management skills, map things out so that I can try to accomplish my biggest priorities. But I'm just trying to relax, not stress out, and just know I can only do what I can do. But yes, I'm someone who tends to stay too busy, so I'm doing okay.
That is good. That is good. Yeah, and you are right. It is a season of being busy, and we have the holiday seasons coming up, and um, so person in long term recovery, and you practice IFS now, internal family systems. A lot of people think that's a family therapy or family therapy approach. My question to you is what is IFS? Help us understand a little bit more about IFS and how that approach is implemented.
I'd love to. And yes, right out the box, internal family systems sounds like something you would apply to a family. And I often wonder if they should change that into something that people can more readily understand just right out of the gate. So this therapy was designed by a guy named Richard Schwartz, Dr. Richard Schwartz, in 1985. And he started as a psychiatrist, but he wasn't the psychiatrist that just prescribed meds. He was like a psychiatrist that did talk therapy with clients. And he actually started out more as a family therapist. And throughout his work with clients, he began to realize that he was noticing that most people had parts of them that would get activated during different times in different situations. So basically, what IFS posits is that we all have a self, and that's with a capital S, self. And that's just like our self, our truest self, our wise mind, kind of like that Jiminy Cricket conscience on the inside that's giving you that good advice for yourself. But then also we have these parts, and these parts can kind of be seen as defense mechanisms that you pick up along the way. So you might have a part of you that reacts to stress by eating, or there's a part that reacts to someone making you feel bad by getting angry. And so it's not really driven by your higher self, but these parts of us that are trying to do a job for us, to protect us, to make our life easier, to keep us organized, that can kind of take control. So basically what we want to do in IFS is we want to kind of get to know all of the different parts that we have and have self be the leader for our parts and collaboration, because there's no bad parts in IFS. There's just maybe misunderstood parts, but they're all trying to accomplish something positive for us and ourselves. So it's basically, we don't want to be angry at our parts. You don't want to be mad at your anxiety. You don't want to be mad at the part of you that wants to use substances. You want to get to know that part, why that part is showing up, and then have a relationship with that part so that you can collaborate and unburden it In IFS, they have different things like firefighters. Those would be the parts of us that try to get us past the flames of emotion. So those would be like the substance using parts or the behaviors that kind of numb us. And then there's the managers that kind of try to keep us on track. Like my manager has been going wild because I'm so busy. She's like with a clipboard, like scribbling down frantically everything I need to do. And then there's like the protector parts. Those are the ones that might get angry or push back because they're trying to protect us and keep us safe from either feeling something or being taken advantage of. And so they call it internal family systems because it's like we have a family inside of us. It's our internal family. And we want to kind of work with those different family members, the different parts inside of us so that we are more like of a collaborative whole. And so we're not fighting against each other. In IFS, they call polarizations. And I'm sure you've experienced this where you can say like, well, a part of me really wants to do this, but another part of me just does not want to do that. And so in those polarizations, it's like we want to get all of our parts and ourself onto an alignment so that we can move forward and make more progress.
Wow. And it goes back to self. And that is interesting to hear because, you know, the father of psychology, everybody is, if you're unfamiliar with the psychology field, is Sigmund Freud. And a lot of even the stuff that he talked about goes back to self, right? With the ego and things like that. So I'm curious. I have to know when it comes to any type of personal stories, right? Like, what's a real life example of how an exiled part from childhood trauma might show up in adulthood? And how can IFS help us to unpack that or unburden that? I'm curious. I'm asking because I want an example.
Yes, and that's an excellent question. And yeah, you said something important, exiles. Exiles are really the parts of us that carry the most burden and the most pain. And oftentimes those exiles are buried very, very deeply that we're not even aware of them. And most of those exiled parts have protectors. So, like a real life example, let's say that you grew up in a family where you had a caregiver discipline you by using shame. So let's say that you did something wrong and they were like, that's just like you. You could never do better. You're so stupid. I don't know what I was expecting. You might have a part of you that is burdened by a heavy, heavy load of shame. And because that shame is so difficult to take on, especially as a child, they want to be in relationship with the parent and they need to be able to function, that oftentimes a protector will show up and the protector would be a little bit stronger. So the protector might be anger. So the anger comes out and says, you know what? I'm not listening to this. You shut up. I'm not stupid, and fights back for that exile. So, how it might look in real life, let's say that I'm going through my day to day life and maybe somebody activates my shame by making me feel like I'm not good enough. Well, I may not even realize that my exile is being activated, but I would notice because my protector would show up and be like, oh, no, you didn't. You didn't talk to me like that. I'm not going to handle that. And so in session, we would talk about like, what are you experiencing? I experienced a lot of anger today. Why was that? Well, I don't know. Some guy was just talking to me wrong. And I just felt like I could just jump over the table at him. And then we would start to get to know like, well, why? Well, because I don't like the way that was making me feel. He made me feel less than. And then we'd get the protector to relax. And then we could connect with the exile that's like, oh, I'm tired of unfeeling worthy. I'm tired of feeling not good enough. And then we could help that exiled part release some of its burdens because, you know, what they say is these exiled parts are really trapped in the past. They don't really realize that you're a grown up now with your own agency and you can make your own decisions. And if somebody's talking bad to you, you can just get up and leave and say, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so it's like once we kind of bring them up to date, they can release those beliefs about how they have to carry this burden and then we offer them new qualities. So instead of feeling shame, do you want to feel pride? Do you want to feel confidence? And then the protector doesn't have to get so angry anymore because it sees the exile's burdens have been released so that it can relax and not respond so much with anger.
Wow. And that really reminds me a lot of what you're talking about. And then I'm going to throw the mic to Trev. A lot of the stuff you're talking about, I teach from a DBT perspective. Of course, for those of you who don't know what DBT is, it's dialectical behavioral therapy. And one of the things that I typically like to teach, depending on where we fall at in the actual the group or what have you, is the most important form of communication is with ourselves. I mean, it's a three-way street. Yes, it's you to me and me to you, but if I need to learn the fundamental aspect of communication is me learning to communicate with myself, knowing what my emotions are telling me, knowing where my thoughts are leading me, things like that. And I love the fact that IFS builds onto that. That I have this parent inside of me, or I have this little piece of side of me that's doing this, and I have this other piece over here that's saying this. And it's really building on that significantly. And I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yes, yes. And don't we know, like all of us know in the mental health and recovery space, is like the call is coming from inside the house. It is coming from within. And I love, like, it is so IFS, there's so many like theories that are pretty similar. It's like they kind of all say the same things, but a different way. And like with DBT, yes, it's like you want your clients to connect with that self, that inner wise self, so that they can work through those difficult parts. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm just feeling really activated and I don't have any distress tolerance today, but we want to get that self that's compassionate and curious and confident and courageous. The self has like all these C qualities, they say. And so it's like we want that person to address it from that standpoint, like you're saying, like with the self talk coming from that place of center so that they can work through things. And I feel like that's such a great thing to do because then we're working ourselves out of a job where eventually our clients don't need us anymore. And that's what we want. We want them to be able to do this on their own and not be dependent upon us forever.
The explanation of what you both are sharing is so such a self care intro or intra inspection that just in the language that you're using helps me to understand better why I've done some of the things that maybe I've done to myself or through myself to myself over a period of time, which for me, I have a massive amount of different things personally that would allow me to be able to look back on and realize and see that I hadn't ever really been becoming the real me that I was supposed to be, even though I was trying to adapt and overcome. That's like one of my most motivating things is just adapt with whatever you're going through and somehow overcome it, counting on myself and my cognition to be able to understand what's going on and try to keep moving forward. So I'm still using that skill, but now I'm using it in a different way about my true inner self. And I like what Miss McTherapist was talking about in some of the modalities of the reasons why getting into what she's gotten into is the work that helps people to understand the worth, the value, the emotional and psychological meaning of to let the inside person of them, their real true self with a capital S, come out. So the process of a coming out is like a stigmatic thing, but it's actually a process internally where we get to really be a real us. And so the work with IFS is it's really interesting to me, and I like what you're doing, and I'm glad that you're here with us today and giving us the opportunity to kind of peel back the proverbial onion and kind of let's get into it a little bit deeper. I don't know how to do that, but I'm willing to listen and learn and thank you for what you're
Yes.
doing. It's important work for humanity.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. And what you say has so many good points. It's like, I think for most of us, it's not been our true self calling the shots. I know for me, it was anxiety, it was substance use, it was fear that was doing the driving of my decision making. I think for so many of us humans, that's exactly what has been happening. And it is kind of like giving back that steering wheel to your true self to make those calls instead of letting those activated parts of you do the driving. And in IFS, they call that blending. That's like when a part comes on really strong and then it becomes you. You are making that decision from that angry part or from that anxious part or from that controlling part. And then I always joke that like myself is like bound and gagged in the trunk, like, help, get me out of here. Anger is taking the wheel and we don't want the decisions. And I think we all relate to that where we have been in a state of activation and we're making a terrible decision. And like inside of us, there is this other self. It's like, oh no, 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 no. This is not a good plan. We don't need to be doing this. But that part has blended with us so strongly that it just completely takes over all of our decision making. And before you know it, everything's been collateral damage. And we're like, trying to pick up the pieces. A really important part of the IFS is not being angry at those parts because just like, well, we all know, like in relationships, if you want somebody to cooperate with you, you have got to have a positive relationship with them. If you approach them for anger or I want to get rid of you, or I'm so sick of you, then that thing is just going to dig in deeper and be like, oh, yeah, fine. I'll just, really dig my heels in now. And so a lot of what I have to do with clients is helping them see that these parts are not bad. They're just trying to accomplish a job. And then once that part feels like we're not antagonistic or attacking it, it's like it can loosen up and be like, yeah, I don't really even like doing the job of being angry. It's not even like good to do. I just feel like I'm forced into it and getting a little bit of curiosity. I think curiosity is where we really, really start. If we can get somebody to be curious, like, why is that anger showing up? Why is that anxiety showing up? Why is that substance abuse showing up? Then we can approach it from a better angle than just trying to eliminate it or get rid of it. Because I feel like that's just a short-term thing. We can suppress it for a while, but then unless we've healed that, it just pops right back up again.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. And the fundamental aspect that keeps ringing through to me is I am trying to really get a balance of all of these parts, right? And that's the one thing that keeps ringing through to me because I can let anger override if I want to. I can let that exiled part of me, override if I want to and be very strong and be pulling me or driving me in this direction. But yet, as you said, it's about that healthy balance. And I think that is key there.
Oh yeah, exactly. And they often like use the example of an organization. Like the CEO is the self, but we absolutely need all of the parts. We need the parts because they have wisdom, they do different jobs. We can't just do it all on our own. We need the wisdom of our parts. So it's like we want self to come in and kind of like learn each of the roles, get people into the right jobs, figure out what's going wrong, why the wrong people are in control of the different jobs, and just begin to align things because you're completely right. It's like we want to have a composite where everyone is working together as a whole and offering their wisdom for each situation without them trying to be the boss and take over. And it's like building trust. We want those parts to build trust with self that I don't have to take over because I trust my inner wise mind to make the decision. And I can tell my inner wise mind, I don't like this. This feels uncomfortable. I don't like how this is happening. And then our inner self can say, okay, I'm going to take that into account when I move forward and I'll make my decisions based on some of the wisdom that you different parts have given me. And yeah, we just don't want them to take over. We want to be the leader. And most of the time, the parts want us to be the leader too, because they're exhausted of doing the hard and like nobody likes them. They think they're doing a terrible job. They're like, fine, you get to be the boss and I'll just relax and give you pointers every now and again.
So, Ms. McTherapist, what percentage or how much, you don't have to do a percentage or a ratio or anything like that, how much of an involvement is your spiritual relationship a part of that to redevelop yourself into a positive way? And I'm not asking your personal story, but as far as IFS goes, how much validation is it necessary to maintain your spiritual aspect of this and that involvement?
Yes, I think that's an important aspect too. And for me personally, I do have a really strong spiritual life. So I like to think about myself as like my God-given spirit. It's my God-given soul that God gave me a bunch of wisdom and strength for the journey ahead. And so it's like I want to connect with that and then connect with my higher power to kind of form that duo of this is self, my true self, my spirit. Higher power, yes, you are like the one partner that I have in this to kind of bounce back and forth. But for people who don't have a spiritual orientation, it can work just as well. It's just like they are just going to focus on their internal guidance system through their self. But if people do have a spiritual belief, I love to bring that in because I think there's so much wisdom to say, yeah, myself can help, but then I also need wisdom from my higher power so that I know kind of like it's not all up to me, that the journey is ahead for a specific reason, and kind of leaning on that. Like if I'm the CEO, he's like, the GM of absolutely everything, and I just am the CEO of my little section. And so that's how I like to think about it. But it's not mandatory, but I do think, and especially in our roles, we see, and just research that's been done, if people have a spiritual life, they do better in almost all areas because I think that's something that really grounds us and gives us strength. And so I think it's so beneficial if people will kind of have that spiritual hygiene where they're praying and considering their higher power, and then we know it's not on our shoulders because for me, that is so helpful. I want to know that it's not just all on my shoulders, that there is something higher than me that has the wisdom and the guidance. So that at the end of the day, I can rest as well.
That's a great explanation. And as far as your personal aspect of that, it's definitely going to be different. But how much of an involvement for each individual does it take to reach the point for them to realize that they have something inside them that hasn't been discovered yet? I like I said, I don't want a percentage or a ratio, but as far as just across the board, is it? I would conceive in my own thinking that it was a necessary component to take growing steps forward with ISS. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does to me, especially for someone who has a spiritual background. I'm like, I would love for people to share in the benefit that I have received from that. But let's just, say that, I mean, most of my clients here I am in Texas, in South Texas. And so, like, basically all my clients have some sort of spiritual background. So it's pretty easy for me just to kind of link that in based on where they are. And so it is kind of, they introduce it first, of course. And then I just kind of like build on that for them. Like, yes, that's right. And, our self is our God given part. I mean, our leader inside of us to kind of like help them have that, like, okay, 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 this is a safe thing to do. I can trust self. It's my God given spirit. I can lean on that. I can lean on my higher power. But I do have clients who are just completely like, nope, there is no higher power. There is no God. And so for them to just say, okay, well, if that's your beliefs, that's fine. But you do have this inner wise mind. And I'm not going to say it's God given, or I'm not going to say, it's from the Lord, but you have an inner wise mind that you were born with. We want to connect to that wise mind and figure out like if we can help these other parts of you work in harmony together. But a lot of people don't even have any connection with the fact that they do have an inner wise mind. They're like, no, all I feel is anxiety. All I feel is anxiousness. All I feel is the firefighter getting me to want to use the substances. And so, like, to help them kind of peel back those layers, like you were saying, and like realize that that's not all that you are. Yes, you're anxious. Yes, you're angry. Yes, you want to engage in substance abuse. But underneath all of that is this higher wise mind that says, you know what, I actually want to be healthy and I actually don't have fun doing this all the time. And I'm actually tired of being broke by spending my money on this. But sometimes it takes a lot of time. But to help them kind of connect to that, we try to do the 8 C's. And I can never get them all, but it's like you want your client to embody curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, And so it's like if you can try to help them like embody some of those things, get curious about it, that's really the gate to connect to that wise mind, because we know that curiosity is the opposite of anxiety. It's the opposite of angry. You have a hard time being curious and angry at the same time, or anxious and angry at the same time. So if we can get them into that place of curiosity, and we call it self energy. And some people have a lot of self energy where they have like that curiosity and it's really easy to access. Some people have very low self energy where it's almost impossible for them to access. But if we just chip away slowly, if I can just get a client who has no self access, just 5 minutes in a therapy session to just kind of contemplate and be curious and compassion, even if it's for a snippet, not even 5 minutes, even if it's just 30 seconds, if we can build from that so that they can come to a place of like, yes. But I do think people with a spiritual background have a little bit of that easier time connecting with that, because I think that's what we see in a spiritual faith. Like, God is kind, God is compassionate, God is courageous. And so we may have a more foundation that helps us link into that a little bit easier. But it works for people with the spiritual practice and those without as well.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you explained it in that concept, because so many people just, so much of humanity, I don't want to say people because we're all people, so many of us humans uh, tend to rely on our own thinking as opposed to being open to grasping the concept of even a higher power. And I get the encouragement aspect of this for those other human beings, because they may not recognize it, but they could discover it if they start scratching at the surface of the self-discovery. It's often what the work that you do. That's really an amazing thing. Kevin, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
I wasn't trying to cut you off either, buddy, but you go ahead.
No, you're good, brother. You won't cut me off at all. Nah, I am just baffled and astounded at the way she is presenting this, because I can, dude, I can literally go the next 3-4 hours and like, let's do a whole 4 or 5 hour show, right? And let's just talk about this, because this is again one of those episodes that we need more than an hour. We need more than an hour and a half. We need more than just like, and I mean, just my mind is going haywire over here, and just listening to you two go back and forth. And I love the way y'all pulled in the spiritual piece of it, because I think spirituality is key. And so I do have a question for you. Now I am going to modify the question on my end because I don't like the way it's worded. So in a looking at this world, this society as we speak, right? Full of chaos, full of conflict, things like that. My question, and it's probably going to be a double question, which aspect do you feel in your personal, or excuse me, in your professional capacity is better to tap into? The calming aspect, right? As part of the 8 C's, calming, or do you feel like curiosity, or do you feel like creativity is better for navigation and for quieting overreactive parts?
Yes. And I think that is such a salient point as well, because we know that if somebody is like in a state of nervous system activation, then they may not even be able to access that curiosity, because it's like part of our executive functioning where we can be curious. And we know, like, if we're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that literally our executive functioning, the part that is curious and wise and thinks long term, is completely offline, which makes sense, right? If we're fighting for our life, we don't need to, philosophically ponder the curiosities of the world. We just need to kick some butt and save ourselves. And so I think that is so good to mention. So, like, if I have a client who is activated, or we think about humankind in general, it's like if we do want them to tap into that curiosity, we do need them to have a regulated nervous system. And so if I have a client, or just humanity in general, I think would practice like, okay, identifying, am I in a state of nervous system activation? And what does that look like if I am? And then how do I physically help my body? Because I think we know mental health is two components. One is our physical reaction to what we're thinking and feeling, and the other is our belief system and what's going on upstairs cognitively. But so often we can't even approach what's going on cognitively if we don't have that place of a calm and centered nervous system. And so, yes, it's like we don't want to put the cart before the horse. If I have a client who's like super stressed out, or just society in general, which we are, I think it'd be so beneficial for us to regulate our nervous systems. And then I think naturally a byproduct would be we would be curious and we would feel calm and we would feel courageous and able to access that part of our mind that is that higher self so that we can do the work we need to do. Yeah, that's a good point.
That is a good point, and I'm glad that that was generally discussed. Something that came into mind for me and an awareness of was that you have to also address people, us, that tend to develop a state of what they call hypervigilance, and that is our constant relation to our environment, our relationships within our family. So if a person has gone for like the most extent of their life to be in a state of hypervigilance, how do you approach through IFS the ability for them to actually discover what they haven't really discovered yet, with remaining their adaptation to overcome everything, all the traumas, all the situations, all the happiness and sadness and uh, relationship things. If they're constantly in a state of hypervigilance, how do you approach that aspect of it?
Yes, so glad you're asking. And something that I love just as much as IFS is somatic therapy, which basically is just the premise that the like of the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And so
Okay.
somatic therapy is like, what do we do physically to like regulate that nervous system, whether it's stretches or breathing or looking one way and having a sigh or just helping our body downshift. And so that would be like a huge component of what I would do in session, like make that person have a sense of felt safety or help them have a sense of felt safety. And then also work with that part because that part is the hypervigilance, that part of them that's like, I have to be on guard. I have to watch out. I can't let go because if I do, then something terrible will happen to me, just like it did all this time. So if we can approach that nervous system regulation through somatic therapy, which I absolutely love, I would probably start there by like doing some grounding, some gentle breathing, some stretches, and then very calmly and curiously approach, like, what is that like for you? And IFS, we often start with the body as well. I would say, like, where do you feel that hypervigilance in your body? And they might say, I feel it in my chest, or I feel like it's just all around me buzzing like an electrical field force. And then we would check, how do you feel towards that? I feel scared. I don't like it. I don't want that. And that just lets me know like we don't have enough self energy to move forward. So I'd say, okay, well, why are you afraid of it? Because it's ruining my life. I don't want to feel this way forever. And then that's probably another part showing up because it's like we know that self is going to be curious and calm. If I have someone saying, I hate that hypervigilance, I know that's another part of them that's like, I don't want this anymore. And so I would help that part relax. Like, I know you don't like the hypervigilance. I know it's really hard. Will you step aside so that I can work with this hypervigilance? It is almost like family therapy, which I've done sometimes, and like the dynamics at play. It's like sometimes you need to get one family member out of the room so that you can have a good connection with another two. And so we'd say, okay, fear, you need to step aside so I can get hypervigilance and self together. And then they'd be like, okay, I am kind of curious about why this hypervigilance is showing up. And then we would open the floor for the hypervigilance. And the hypervigilance would probably say something like, my whole life I've had to be on edge. I'm so exhausted, but I have to protect you. And then probably underneath that hypervigilance would be an exile, a child who was taken advantage of, or an adult who was in a traumatic situation or a series of traumatic situations where the hypervigilance knew, like, I have to take over to keep this person protected. So it's very like gradual and in stages. And the founder always says like what comes up should come up. If it's a hypervigilance or if we're not even even at that for the first few sessions, whatever kind of rises to the surface is what needs to be dealt with first. And so, in that aspect, it's very easy because we can just take with whatever is showing up in the moment. And it's called a trailhead, actually. And the trailhead just kind of takes us down that path of where we need to kind of target the work for the person. And we don't have to have any particular like set of strategy. There are steps, but I don't have to say, well, we're not talking about that today. We're talking about this today. I just go wherever that trailhead leads us that day.
Outstanding.
Wow.
Some of the things that you talked about just in that answer led me down another new road that I think needs to be actively pursued and discovered and talked about is how does this affect our first responders? How does this affect our military veterans and our law enforcement and our firefighters and dispatch and EMTs and paramedics? Because those people have to deal with traumatic situations all the constant time. And they have to be hypervigilant to start with for their self-protection awareness in these environments, but yet they're still going forward and doing what's necessary to help others. But yet again, maybe somewhere inside, there's a part of themselves that they're not recognizing that has got them to the point where they're actually negatively impacting themselves, even though they're elite. They might be advanced in what they're doing. How do we go about finding those people, and how do we approach helping them as well?
Yes. And oh man, I love that question because like what I kind of hear you saying is like, if they are somebody who's having to face dire situations, that hypervigilance may not be something we want to shift so much that they don't have it anymore. It's like we need that hypervigilance in these certain situations so that they can be on guard and they can be alert. So the differentiation with that would be is we want them to have this ability to stay on alert, but we want to take away all of the emotional burdens that that part has carried, because underneath it, there's probably a lot of situations that they've experienced that they are still storing a lot of emotional trauma that's connected to that hypervigilance. So we want to help them release those emotions, release those experiences, so they can have this part that is aware and be like, tag in hypervigilance. You're on duty today with me. We do need to be hyper aware, but without all the emotional connotation of remembering or trying not to remember why I'm hyper vigilant because I saw the child, this happened to them, because somebody was shooting at me. It's like they can release some of those burdens, but still keep the strength. And I think that's like one of the biggest things in IFS. It's like we want all of our parts because they all have incredible strengths to keep us safe, to figure things out, to get the job done. We just want to remove the emotional burdens that are attached to those so that they can do their jobs. But I would think if you're working with somebody who is experiencing trauma on an ongoing basis, that is something you would have to get with like on a very like routine basis to say, okay, what this week are you carrying emotionally from these experiences? Where are those burdens? Was it fear this time? Was it just hopelessness this time? Was it a sense of dread? And let's work through releasing those. Like physically, I'll have some people like shake it out, brush it off, cry it out, talk it through so that they can release that. And in IFS, there's a lot of visual components. So I'd say, okay, imagine that burden of despair that you felt on this call. And they're like, okay, I'm with it. It's really uncomfortable. And then I want you to imagine, how are we going to release that burden? We could burn it in a fire. We could sink it in the ocean. We can imagine it evaporating into the atmosphere. And I think that component of allowing it to like dissolve or to be transmuted into something else, I think is so good to help relieve that. But it might have to happen in stages, especially if somebody has experienced a lot of trauma and a lot of really scary situations. It would probably just be one at a time. And the thing is this hypervigilance, which is probably protecting some exiles, they would each have their own story. And they would say, yeah, I remember last February. Yeah, I remember 10 years ago in November. And we would just need to work through those one at a time and not get rid of the hypervigilance, but just take away the sting of those emotional burdens that it's carrying.
Absolutely. So one of the things that brought to my mind as you were talking about it was earlier this year, and I'm not pointing out Texas, but a natural disaster that happened in Texas with that flooding and the Girl Scout land and all those lost young people. There was a first responder that was working that, and I saw some footage of him after the fact of him doing his absolute best, and he was overwhelmed. And it overwhelms me right now because in my heart, I wish that I could have reached out and given and given him a hug, let him know it's going to be okay. So developing that insight and the recognition of discovering the self as a first responder, especially someone that's got that hard of work to do, and that I, like I said, I wanted my heart to reach out to him and just hold him and say, "Man, you're doing the best that you can, and that's uh, crucial, the work that you do, but you need help too." So from a humanistic aspect of it, it's a great thing to recognize that within each one of ourselves, we have another self that we're not even touching ends with unless we do this kind of work that you do with us uh, to find it out. So, and I didn't mean to be a little bit over emotional about it, but that was a terrible incident with the loss of a lot of young lives that our greatest resource, children, is diminished. So,
Yeah. Oh, Trevor, yes. Yes. In fact, a little girl who goes to school with my daughter was one of the lives that were lost in the flood because we're right around the Rio Grande and the Guadalupe, right where we are. And so, yes, like I am just now able to kind of talk to about it without like just breaking down because it was just so horrible to think about all those precious children, adults that were lost. And I love what you're saying here because it's like just like I think yourself wanted to reach out and like hug this guy and tell him like it's okay, buddy. I know there's only so much you can do. You did an excellent job, but you can't save everyone and I know it's overwhelming. We would want his self to love on that part, right? Because there's a part of him that's carrying so much pain and hurt. And it's like the self is that good internal parent that's like, buddy, you did amazing. And that doesn't mean that it will always be successful, but come here and let me give you that hug and tell you what a wonderful job you did, even though it may not have turned out the way you wanted to. And that's what self is so great at doing too. It can really comfort the parts of us that feel that loss and like they tried so hard, but it didn't work out. And that self just knows exactly what to say to encourage them, to reinforce that, and to allow them to grieve, right? Because sometimes we cannot fix it. We can't make it better. We just have to allow that part, the space to feel bad about it in the presence of love, which we know is so healing. It's like if we can allow someone to go through those negative things in a space where they feel safe and they feel loved, there is so much transformation that can happen. And so we want to build that self energy so that every one of their parts are in a space of safety and love so that they can grieve and heal and get the encouragement that they need. But yeah.
right. And that's discovery of the self, and it's an amazing process.
Mhm.
Kevin, were you about ready for another question first?
For another round of questions. Yeah, I do. I do. Trevor, very touching. Which I was sitting here listening to you two go back and forth, and that was very touching on what y'all were talking about. So thank y'all for bringing that up because our first responders are, man, they are so critical. Everybody from a CNA to the emergency room providers and staff to law enforcement to military, just anybody who can be considered a first responder. So I'm glad that you
Yeah,
two
hold
were
on.
talking about that.
There's diminished ones that are at the forefront of it every day, and those are the correctional officers. They go through every,
Absolutely.
and they're
Absolutely.
not they're not recognized properly. I don't believe. As a former one, I experienced that for a long time. No recognition, no no uh, accolades for our. that type of service. So I'll stay on that silver line till the day I die. I promise you that.
So, as far as the integration of all 8 of these C's, when we talk about trauma, when we talk about, because y'all two were mentioning a lot of trauma, whether it be with young ones, whether it be in adulthood or what have you. What does that look like? Like, just in a general sense, when it comes to integrating or leveling out the playing field with the 8 C's as it relates to traumatic experiences. And the reason I ask, because uh, my brain keeps going back to transactional analysis, where we have these different aspects that are talking and overreacting most times than not. That fight or flight syndrome is just automatically on and triggered just like that. So that is my question. What does that look like with the integration of the 8 C's as it relates to the traumatic experiences people go through?
Yes. And I think it is such a process. And I like to explain it to my clients like, let's say that a new CEO takes over an organization and everything is a dumpster fire. Like nothing's getting done, smoke's pouring out the windows. It's just basically just a cluster. Well, when that new CEO gets there, the best thing for him to do is not be like, everybody, I'm whipping y'all into shape. Everything's wrong. Y'all are screwing it all up. It's to just tread very lightly and to get to know what's going on. So that would be our first step, is just what they call parts mapping. Like we're just like, okay, let's just see, let's just take stock. Like what is going on? How much are we in anxiety? How much are we in hypervigilance? How much are we in anger? And just even like writing it down on a piece of paper. Like these are all the maps of what's going on. And then kind of digging in like, okay, and what jobs are each one responsible for? Okay, well, anxiety is responsible for making me get all the jobs done. And anger is responsible for me putting people in their place because I'm tired of being taken advantage of. And so it's like we want to respect what's going on. We don't want to just jump in there and be like, well, self is the boss and everyone's going to listen to me now, because there's no relationship yet. There's no collaboration yet. And so eventually we want people to be in that state of self energy all the time. I don't know if we ever will be as humans, but we want them to embody the 8 C's as much as they possibly can. And the way to do that is to work with every single part until it feels like it's safe to give up that job, to release their burdens. And until that point, we just kind of have to allow it to be what it is. And Dr. Schwartz talks about how that's good, because we don't want to tip the apple cart too much, because people are, even though it may be dysfunctional, they are functioning to some degree. And we don't want to just completely incapacitate them. We want to just very gradually start to change a few things. And so it's like, okay, first, for me, it was like, let me work on my anxiety, because that was like my top part that was constantly with me all the time. And once we unburdened my anxiety, I felt a lot more calm, a lot more confident. Yes, there were so many parts, but it was probably like a 10% more expansion of the confidence, of the calmness, of the compassion, of the courage that I could feel on a day-to-day basis. Because our parts aren't trying to, but they are squelching all of those 8 C's because they're so used to running the ship that they don't even realize there's another leader inside that can help them. And so it's like the more we build a collaboration with each part, the more we unburden it, the more we're going to see someone's self energy go up and up and up and up, until eventually, it takes a long time for all those parts to be identified and collaborated with, and the exiles underneath them to be unburdened. And so just a really slow process until you get to the point where I probably have self energy about half the time, and half the other time my parts are still running the show and I'm feeling tense or frustrated or whatever it is. And so my job is just to continually to be like, okay, you know what, you felt a little bit frustrated today, and that was a part of you showing up, and have that relationship. Okay, frustration, why were you here today? Okay, well, you were annoyed because things at your kids' schools were going bonkers, and that's understandable, but can you like release that so that I can come in? And so it's just like one part at a time, no part left behind, I like to say. But eventually, if we work with all those parts, we will see a huge influx of all of those integrations of those C characters, C characteristics, but just very gradually.
And no, and I do appreciate that. And the follow-up question on this is, what do you find? And I'm sure everybody's different, so I'm looking, I guess, for an average here, or what you would consider to be average. What do you find is the hardest part or the most burdensome struggle for people to be able to integrate the 8 Cs? Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Totally. Yes, and there's a few tricky customers. I think people's inner critics, those can be so strong that they're like, I run the show and I bully him into submission, and I'm not letting self take over because self is going to do a terrible job. I call them like the inner drill sergeants. Those are very hard to work past because they're like, I know it all and I'm doing it right. And I don't even need self. Self, you take a back seat. I am here. And then also our anxiety, because it's also like, no, 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 I'm keeping us safe. We don't need to do anything different. We're fine. We're fine. We're fine. And so those two can be kind of difficult, but it's like what we need to do with those in particular is to let them know, hey, I'm not here to fire you. I'm not here to say, get out of here. I'm here to say, what are your goals? Because what we're going to hear from that, like with the drill sergeant, is like, I'm going to bully you into you're the best person you could be. And then you're going to get the accolades and you're going to be successful. And then we can tell that inner drill sergeant, like, guess what? We want him to be successful too. We want him to be where he needs to be in life as well. You are completely right. We're not trying to usurp your goal here. We're just trying to get to your goal through a different avenue. And then most of the time they'll be like, no way. I didn't even know you cared. And I've been doing this really hellacious job of being a total butthead to you 24/7 because I thought I had to, but maybe we can begin to shift that. So just like anyone else, like almost motivational interviewing, like you want to know like what they want. And then you kind of use that as like, okay, we can go with that because most of the time the parts do want what is best for the person. Sometimes it doesn't seem like they do. Like sometimes we'll get like self-harm parts or even suicidal ideation. And it's like hard to kind of tell, like, does this part really want what's best? But most of the time it does. For people who have that, self-harm or thoughts of ending it all, most of the time it's like, I just want myself to be out of pain. I just want to avoid what's going on with me. And it's like, yeah, we don't want to be in pain either. But there are other ways of morphing and working with that to where we can accomplish that goal without taking somebody out or without hurting them. But yes, some parts are incredibly strong, and they're strong for a reason because they have run the ship for the most amount of years. And so we typically want to work with them first and give them a ton of respect. And another thing with IFS is we send gratitude to the parts. We're like, thank you. Thank you for doing this job. This has been a miserable job. You have done your best. You've done a great job. Thank you for showing up for me. I appreciate that. And just like us, like when somebody shows up and says, hey, you've done an amazing job, that melts us. We're like, oh, okay. Well, thank you. I'm glad you could recognize that this has been hard for me. And that really opens the dialogue between the self and the part. But there's got to be a lot of that cooperation and not wanting just to take over from that part.
Gotcha. Thank you for explaining that, because for one of the things that a running theme, right? And everybody knows I practice DBT. And one of the things you keep hitting on over and over again, and it sounds like there's a lot of overlap between DBT and IFS, is this idea of wise mind, right? And wise mind is having that healthy balance of learning to use or integrate both cognition and emotional thought processes. And so that's one of the major running themes that I keep going back to mentally throughout this whole show is how do we communicate with ourselves, and how do we practice not letting this part of myself overreact all the time? How do I um, manage some part of me so I can have a better reaction and a better outcome, hopefully. And so, thank you, thank you. It's been an amazing episode so far, because you've taught me as a therapist, and I'm like, do I need to be certified at IFS to go practice some of these principles and concepts?
Yeah.
Can I start up another group and integrate DBT and IFS on the unit? I mean, because everything you're sharing, like, there's a lot of significant overlap. And that's the one thing DBT I don't think touches on. And I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But I don't think DBT really touches on a lot of the different parts of self, right? And if it doesn't, I apologize. I'm not an expert in DBT, but integrating the two can, I think, have much better outcomes. And one of the things I do in my clinical practice, I integrate DBT with existentialism. And so having that IFS, it sounds like would be a critical component for the therapeutic approach or approaches with the populations I serve. So thank you. Absolutely. I am amazed and humbled that we got you on the show today.
I'm thankful too, but just for clarification, there's only one population that we serve, and that's the human population. Remember that. My next step of questioning, as far as IFS goes, is okay. Let's peel back another layer here, in the sense that we've addressed the 8C, which I don't know what even all of them are. I have a 4 or 5 that you mentioned. But as far as the 8Cs, what are some of the other modalities that you use in IFS for the treatment for others that helps them to discover their real and true self?
Yes. Oh, I also love DBT. DBT is often in the like background running because of that wise mind. And there's so many like de-escalation and grounding and like having that pulling apart of things to where we're like, okay, let's slow it down and figure out what's going on, which is a lot of what IFS does. It's like you're activated right now. Let's see if we can touch base with that part and get the self to do a little bit of coaching one-on-one. And there's just so many parallels I find between so many different theories, even just like defense mechanisms or CBT, where we think about our cognitions. Those would be a lot of our parts that hold those cognitions and those beliefs. And then the self would be the person that helps dispute those cognitions and disputes those beliefs. And so I think it's so complementary to so many different therapies that it is just kind of like a great add-in and works so good for some people. Like certain people, like I had a client yesterday who was just like, wow, I thought I was just crazy. I thought, there was these different parts of me that each wanted something else. And I really thought I was losing my mind. And I feel so much better knowing that that's okay, that I can build a relationship with these parts and get them into cooperation with me one day. But I find like there is that undercurrent in psychology where we talk a lot about like the different aspects of defense mechanisms or emotional reactions. And I think those are kind of like, okay, those are our parts. And then that wise mind or the self or whatever Freud would say, whatever the higher mind between the ego and the id or whatever the heck that was. It's like there's kind of like these ripples all along the surface where it's like, yeah, these parts are definitely connecting. But I love my somatic therapy. That's probably my other secondary go-to is like just helping people release trauma and stress from their bodies. I assign that homework almost every single time, like practice this somatic exercise every single day because I think like y'all know, like once your body is wired for that hypervigilance, then your trigger and your fuse is just so much shorter. Anything can happen. A bird flies past your window and you're like, ah, here we are again. And so it's like if we can begin to have some calmness inside of our bodies, then that will kind of allow the self to come forward and to work with those individual parts as they arise. But there are just so many complementary theories with IFS.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. That is, wow. I did not realize, you know, yeah, I told you this morning that, and you corrected me when I said that I'm not a family therapist or a family and marriage therapist. And so I threw the book away. Absolutely, 100%. And then you corrected me and you were like, hey, it's not an actual family therapy approach, not as much as it is individual one-on-one and stuff like that. And the way you've just broken it down, and of course, we only scratched surface level so far. I am just amazed and astounded at how it integrates so well with various therapeutic modalities myself. So that was a great question, Trev. Thank you for asking that. Because there's a lot of stuff that it is hard to integrate one theory with another, at least different components of it. And IFS seems to be one of those that's well rounded from the way it sounds and the way you just explained it, that it integrates well with MI, integrates well with marking the tape. It integrates well with CBT, DBT, different components of psychodynamics. So thank you for that.
No problem. So glad to be able to share. I love to spread the news. And, one other thing I will just add is, even though it's a relatively new therapy, it's only been around for the last 40 years, it is evidence-based. And I think that's something that's really important as well. So they have done the research studies to make sure that it is one of the best practiced and evidence-based theories. So it is safe to use with clients, and there is a background of that research so that if you are using it in session, you know that it's not just coming out the box brand new, who knows what's going to happen. There is a body of research behind it.
That's great news to hear.
Absolutely. 100%. And I'm gonna let Trev finish us out, because you have just shared so much. And of course, before we hang up, we have to get you scheduled for another show to keep talking about this, because there's so much to know. There's so much to understand in the mental health field. And so, with that being said, Trev, take the bull by the horns.
I always like doing that. Hook them horns. And I'm from Michigan, but that's okay. My both both my brothers, I'm in Texas, and my older brother passed away in Texas, so I'm kind of partial to the BET. It's really interesting because we talked a lot about uh, corrections, and Kevin, you gave kind of a general reference to corrections, and correcting things is really strongly encouraging my Thin Silver Line family. And if I just like to reach out a little bit and say, if there's anybody out there that's in correction, and you have to be hyper vigilant every day, and you don't understand why you're feeling or acting or thinking the way that you are, there might be something inside you that you haven't tapped into yet that you need help with. We have the 988 line. We have other resources from NAMI and SAMHSA and all these organizations that help individuals to deal with the ways that they're thinking and feeling and acting. So don't think that you're alone, because you're not. With that being said, this is the cool part of the show where I get to ask a guest, and I love it. The work that you're doing, my hat's off to you for sure. And what you're doing is extremely important in the humanistic aspect of real reality of the entire population of Earth, the planet Earth. And as far as that goes, what would be a call to action that you would give to others as far as the realization that they have something inside of them that they may have not discovered yet? So what is your call to action to promote as far as other people developing that for themselves?
Yes. So I would say that, the two-pronged approach that I suggest every client who walks through my door. Number one is to begin to identify how often their body is in a state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which, if you just do a simple Google search, you'll see like the fight flight is like the revved heartbeat, the shakiness, the rapid thoughts. And then the other side of that is like feeling disconnected, feeling out of it, feeling zoned out. So begin to notice, how often are you feeling that way? And to pair those with some somatic therapy exercises. You can YouTube that, and there's resources are plentiful. And then just to begin to really notice what are the parts showing up for you every single day, and to begin to have curiosity when it comes to those parts. And if they wanted to go a little bit deeper, they could choose like a part a day at the end of the day to take some deep breaths and say, you know what, I've really noticed a feeling of sadness with me today. Let's see if I can't get curious about that. And just like we would be getting to know a new person, we would just very gently ask them some questions, get to know them. We wouldn't be directive, we wouldn't be forceful. That's how we would want them to address their parts. Hello, sadness. Here you are. I know you showed up for a reason today. Tell me a little bit about you and why you're here. And just allowing that relationship. So that's it in a nutshell. We want the somatics to calm the body, and then we want that curious, wise mind to start forming a relationship with those different parts very slowly, very nicely. And I think that would get somebody started on the right track.
And I'm going to ask one of the last questions here. If somebody wanted to contact you, how would they reach out to you?
You can email me at Lady McTherapist, just like it sounds, Lady plus McTherapist, all one word, at gmail.com. And then, of course, you can find me on TikTok. I'm on Instagram. I'm on YouTube, all on Lady McTherapist. So find me that way.
Lady McTherapist, thank you. I am humbled that you were able to make it today. I'm humbled that you shared your experience with it. And another episode down.
I'm
Another
so
episode
thankful
down.
and grateful for
Thank you.
all
Yeah.
the work that you're doing. It is so important. It is really a vitally important part of all aspects of general life. It's critical, and I'm thankful and grateful for you just being you today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so touched. And I appreciate y'all so much for having me on. It has been such a beautiful experience for me to get to talk about really what I love. And so I thank y'all and send you so much gratitude that you're putting these podcasts out into the world to help touch lives that may not have ever been able to be touched by this information before. So thank y'all.
Absolutely.